Hello, everyone. Good day to you, wherever you may be. It's been a while since I've uploaded any videos. Just been preoccupied, things going on around here, things to do, and just other little things that have occupied my time. Today I wanted to upload a video that I think some may find interesting, especially if you've been into shortwave for a while. And if you haven't, you might find it entertaining. In the early 90s, I believe 91 maybe, Radio Shack came out with a little shortwave book that had an audio cassette in it. And it was called Listening to Shortwave. It was a little introductory. It was designed and made for someone new to shortwave as an introductory of what you would expect and what it's like and everything like that. Well, I bought that book back in the early 90s when and I still have it today. I have the cassette today. I turned the audio from the cassette into a digital format so I could upload it. So I figured, well, maybe someone might be interested in this. So I'm going to just play this video, and it's not me talking, thank God. It's just my screen. The software is Audacity, and it's an MP3 file, and hopefully you'll get to see this before YouTube takes it down over some copyright crap. And but anyway, this is from Radio Shack in the early 90s, called Listening to Shortwave, and it's about 23 minutes long, so just sit back and listen just like you're listening to a podcast or something like that, and take a little trip down memory lane and enjoy it. So it's dated. Yes, it's dated. It's from the early 90s, of course, but it's, like I said, it's still a nice little trip down memory lane. So enjoy it, and everyone have a good day. And here we go, Listening to Shortwave from Radio Shack around 1991.
At 17 hours, 38 minutes, Coordinated Universal Time.
Welcome to the world of shortwave radio. This tape, along with a book, Listening to Shortwave, included in the package, will introduce you to one of the most fascinating hobbies in the world. You'll need to go through the book a few times to become familiar with the technical expressions, to know what to look for in a shortwave receiver, and how to use it for the greatest enjoyment. But right now, we'd like to give you a panoramic view of how shortwave works, what it's used for, what to listen for, and what some of the broadcasts sound like. We have a whole flock of people to thank for today's miracle of shortwave, starting back in the early 1800s when Joseph Henry in the United States and Michael Faraday in England experimented with electromagnets. Another Englishman, James Maxwell, theorized that electrical impulses travel through space at the speed of light, and Heinrich Hertz proved this theory in the late 1880s. Today, we use Heinrich's last name to express radio frequencies, usually expressed in kilohertz or megahertz. Regular broadcasting in the United States began in 1920. KDKA in Pittsburgh and WWJ in Detroit were the first regular commercial broadcast stations. And by the mid-1920s, Frank Conrad and other scientists were pioneering shortwave broadcasting. You're probably familiar with radio in terms of AM and FM. You should be. More than 96% of all American homes have radios. More than have telephones or cars or even bathtubs. And most of those radios bring in AM or FM broadcasts, or both. But AM and FM represent only a small fraction of the radio spectrum currently being used for broadcasting. About 1/50th, in fact. It's in the other 49/50ths of the spectrum that we find the broadcast frequencies that range from frequencies that travel maybe 25 miles to the frequencies that you're interested in, the ones that bring in the shortwave broadcasts from around the world. How does shortwave radio work? To put it in the simplest terms, radio signals are sent skyward where they are reflected back by the ionosphere, a part of the Earth's atmosphere that's electrically charged by the sun. They come back down to Earth at some point distant from where the signal originated, and they bounce back up to the ionosphere, where they're reflected back again, each time hitting a different point further away from the originating signal, until pretty soon they've skipped halfway around the world, enabling you to sit in your living room and listen to Radio Australia or the Voice of Free China. The technicalities of radio frequencies are described in chapters 1 and 2 of the book Listening to Shortwave, and we'll cover how to tune in some of them and what they sound like in a minute. The frequencies that you'll be most interested in for listening to shortwave will be medium frequencies, or MF as they're called, 1650 to 3000 kilohertz, and high frequencies, or HF, from 3 to 30 megahertz, which is the most crowded part of the shortwave radio spectrum. You'll hear me refer to both frequencies and bands. A band is just a grouping of frequencies, and often we talk about a particular frequency in a particular band. Let's just run through the frequency groupings and highlight some of their uses. Down in the very low frequency, 3 to 30 kilohertz range, you have such things as submarine and other military communications. There isn't very much available in the way of consumer equipment that can pick up these broadcasts. 30 to 300 kilohertz is called low frequency. Here you have such things as navigation systems for submarines and for aircraft and for ships at sea. You also have local European commercial stations which are on the long wave band, just below the beginning of our AM band. There's not much on these frequencies that can be heard in the United States. Medium frequencies are very busy, ranging 300 to 3000 kilohertz, 3 megahertz. From 500 to 1650 is where you'll find the AM broadcast band, and that applies anywhere in the world. Above 1650, you'll hear amateur broadcasts, military communications, and commercial stations from around the world. Next is the high-frequency band I mentioned a moment ago, and here you not only get all kinds of voice broadcasting, but an assortment of non-vocal sounds. Morse code is still used by radio hams. Radio teletype, commonly called RTTY, is the transmission of print through the airways. And surprising as it may seem, this isn't just for commercial purposes. It's popular with ham radio operators also. Fax transmissions, which you probably think of just in terms of being hooked up to a telephone, can be transmitted thousands of miles in the high-frequency bands. The Government Weather Service uses radio facsimile to send out weather maps and photos on both the MF and HF bands. 30 to 300 megahertz is called the VHF, or Very High Frequency Band, and these frequencies are very good for short-range broadcasts, say around 25 miles. What you'll find in this range are the VHF television channels, the lower-numbered ones, FM radio, and lots of police, fire, military, and aircraft communications. Listening to higher frequencies on the UHF band is described in the book, and there are occasional interesting things to be found at the higher frequencies, but most of your listening will be confined to the frequencies I've listed for you. Shortwave can be listened to at any time, day or night, and there's always something of interest to pick up. But some times are better for listening than others, not because of program offerings, but for technical reasons. During the daylight hours, the sun is charging the ionosphere, but at night the ionization decreases. During the daytime, signals in the medium band below 3 megahertz are absorbed by one of the layers of the ionosphere and are reflected back only short distances. So if you're tuned into a station halfway around the world, it probably won't come in. When night falls, the signal isn't being absorbed as much by the ionosphere, and the signal probably will come in strong again. In the high-frequency band, from 3 to 30 megahertz, reception varies with band frequency. Toward the lower end of the band, nighttime listening is much better than daytime because of the ionosphere absorption. As the band frequency is increased, the signals bounce off the ionosphere rather than being absorbed. Now, daytime listening is significantly better than during the night. Near the high end of the band, listening can be quite variable. A distant daytime station bouncing off the ionosphere changes at night because the ionosphere changes when the sun goes down. The absorption layer goes away, and the bounce is from a layer that is much higher. So your guide to the best listening time in your area on these frequencies is trial and error. And because the ionosphere is so important to your listening, you need to track the sunspot cycle. High solar radiation usually means more distant high-frequency listening. If you've twirled the dial on your AM receiver at night, you've probably been delighted at some of the stations you've been able to pull in from some other part of the country. But for the world of shortwave broadcasting, you'll need a shortwave receiver. Receivers come in many makes and models and in wide price ranges. Several lists are included in the book. Almost any powerful receiver will bring in the major foreign broadcast stations, BBC World Service, for example, or maybe the Voice of Free China. But here are a couple of things to consider. If you're only interested in receiving voice transmissions, a fairly low-cost, not too sophisticated receiver will probably be all you need. But if you would also like to tune in Morse code broadcasts, also known as CW or continuous wave broadcast, radio teleprinter signals, and a single sideband two-way conversation, you'll need a receiver that has a beat frequency oscillator circuit, usually referred to as a BFO. Without a BFO, if you were tuned to a Morse code broadcast, for example, you'd hear a kind of rushing sound. So keep this in mind when considering receivers. Today's shortwave communications receivers will give you coverage of all frequencies from the low end of the long wave band, which is 150 kilohertz, all the way to 30 megahertz. You can buy a receiver with a tuning system that is either analog or digital. The older receivers generally use analog tuning. With the analog tuner, frequencies are divided into 5 or 6 bands, and tuning is a two-step process. First switching to the desired band, and then rotating a tuning knob linked to a pointer and a readout dial. The newer units utilize digital tuning. Instead of a dial, there is a liquid crystal display, and you'll see digital readouts of exact frequency numbers. So instead of fine-tuning with a steady hand to bring in the exact frequency, as you would have to do with analog tuning, you can just punch it in, about the same way you would punch in a number on a touch-tone telephone. With digital tuning, you may also get automatic scanning, which enables you to search through a particular band on the spectrum at regular intervals if desired. Your Radio Shack salesperson can help you sift through the various models that are available and help you decide which is the best equipment for what you want to accomplish. Then, once you've bought a receiver, you want to familiarize yourself with what's available for you to listen to. And you'll want to find out where you can get that information. And you'll certainly want to know what it all sounds like. And we'll cover all of that on the other side of this cassette. So please turn to side 2 now. Sitting in your living room or bedroom or den with a shortwave receiver at your fingertips is the equivalent of having a super satellite dish, bringing in 1,000 television channels from 150 countries. That's the scope of the radio broadcast spectrum. Of course, it's fun and it's educational just to spin the tuning dial or punch in frequencies at random on your digital tuner. But it's just as much fun to know what's out there and to do your listening on a systematic basis. A good thing to have, some people would insist that it's an absolute necessity, is a good manual listing the worldwide broadcasting bands. There are several to choose from, and maybe you'll want more than one. Different people have different ideas about which are the most important or the most valuable, but here's a few that you can choose from. World Radio TV Handbook, published by Billboard Publications, is one you can usually find in the library or at the larger bookstores. Among other things, this book lists foreign broadcasters along with current frequencies and times. It will also give you a list of English language broadcasts and their times and frequencies. And the publication is jam-packed with all kinds of other information. Another, available at larger libraries, is Passport to World Radio, published by International Broadcast Services. And this lists hour by hour, country by country, and station by station information, along with features of various kinds and information about equipment. Listening to Shortwave lists a couple of monthly magazines that you might want to check out. Popular Communications covers a whole range of interests, including pirate radio, radio history, product reviews, CB broadcasting, ham radio, and lots more. Monitoring Times is also filled with varied features and includes a day-by-day shortwave broadcast station, frequency, and time information that makes it popular with shortwave program listeners. Both of these are about $20 a year. So, what's out there? Well, we all know about AM, and that occasionally we can hear distant stations at night. Europe has long-wave broadcasting, similar to our AM, in the 148.4 to 283.5 kilohertz frequencies. And once in a while, these stations can be picked up at night in the eastern part of the United States. Below 5.950 megahertz in the shortwave spectrum are what are known as tropical broadcasting bands, so-called because they are used by tropical countries. These are countries that get a lot of thunderstorms that cause static bursts, and because of this, they are assigned frequencies which compensate for this somewhat, because they usually have less atmospheric noise than other frequencies. Most international shortwave broadcasting takes place in the 49 and 41 meter bands, which are the most popular and most used bands, followed by bands 31 and 25 meters. Most of the rest of the international broadcasts can be found in or adjacent to the 75 meter band, and a wide variety on the 22, 19, 16, 13, and 11 meter bands. Let's hop around and see what you might find as you punch in some frequency numbers.
BBC World Service, Live World Today, presented by Sebastian O'Mara.
At 5.975 megahertz in the 49 meter band, the BBC World Service, broadcasting from London, might be doing a pop music review, to be followed by a serious news program. BBC World Service News is perhaps the most respected broadcast news service in the world.
You are tuned to Radio Deutsche Welle.
If you want to keep up on European events from a European perspective, Radio Deutsche Welle at 6.040 will give you news and commentary on a whole variety of topics. Of course, it helps if you speak German. This is a German language station. If you're a jazz fan, you might try 9.720 megahertz and be pleasantly surprised to find that it's a Radio Moscow frequency. If you're more inclined to traditional Greek music, you might try 9.395 or 9.420 or 11.645, all of which will bring you the voice of Greece. One of the fun things to do is to tune in one of the busy bands, say the 31 meter band, and just run through the frequencies to see what stations you might pick up. Assuming you just wanted to see what was there and didn't want to get too involved in any one particular program, here's what it might sound like.
In October 1990, Dickie Murdoch went out to play golf. He was snatching a break in the middle of making a TV series for the Studio 9 will be your jumping off point for Latin America this hour. In der Hamburger Sportverein und Eintracht Frankfurt immer dabei waren und
brasileños se acostumbraron a invertir en aquellos países.
Fairs. By 10 a.m., a field worker or market woman
局委托民间脱掉的字样，而且执行人员也都挂有职员证。此外，有些公司
What's the use of their political struggle if they don't care for free?
Finding the major stations around the world is pretty easy. Stations like the BBC and Radio Moscow are quickly identified. But sometimes there's no easy way to figure out just what station you've tuned in, especially if the broadcast is in a foreign language. But most stations will identify themselves on the hour, and sometimes they'll do it in English. Another thing to look for is a musical signal. For example, if you heard something like this over and over.
Radio-Canada International.
You'd know you were listening to Radio Canada. As you hunt through the different broadcast bands, And assuming that your receiver does have BFO, or beat frequency oscillator capability, you're likely to run across a variety of interesting sounds. Morse code, of course. As I said earlier, Morse code is still used by radio hams, and this might be a conversation between two radio ham operators. One of the advantages of Morse code is that it can be received and decoded at much greater distances than voice transmissions. Sometimes, perhaps not so much today as in years past, some governments don't want their citizens to hear certain programs, and they jam them. Here's what jamming sounds like. These are Russian jammers. Another transmission that you may come across may sound like another kind of jamming, but it isn't. Give a listen. See what you think this is. Well, if you had an RTTY interface and a printer, that might be music to your ears. That's the sound of radio teletype, transmitting maybe tomorrow's Wall Street Journal. There are lots of ways to set your watch and your clocks, but no one has a better way to do it than to listen to shortwave.
At the tone, 17 hours, 38 minutes, Coordinated Universal Time.
There are a number of stations that broadcast accurate time signals. The primary U.S. broadcaster of this type of signal is the National Bureau of Standards, and they operate on 2.5, 5, 10, 15, and 20 megahertz with an accuracy of 1 part in 10 trillion. Slow scan television is a signal used to transmit a computer image. Here's what it sounds like without a computer, if you're just listening. A single sideband is so called because it is only half the width of an AM band, and thus allows for more channels in the crowded shortwave bands. Single sidebands are used for two-way conversations that may sound like this.
Would you want to use it again after you use the single single? She's all lined up on the cards and everything. So that sounds real great.
And if you search through the frequencies, you might hear weather forecasts from the National Weather Service, pirate stations, which may be broadcasting entertainment, or the messages of guerrillas from South America or the Middle East, or ship-to-shore communications. And if you're a race car fan, you can tune in some ultra-high frequencies and listen to your favorite race car driver talking to his crew in the pits. In the range of 461 to 469 or 851 to 859 megahertz, you can listen in at the NASCAR Winston Cup Series or the PPG IndyCar World Series or other big meets. The popularity of shortwave listening is such that you can also tune in programs about shortwave listening. And you can do that on your shortwave receiver or your computer. If you have a computer and a modem, there are two bulletin boards waiting for you. One is the Association of North American Radio Club's bulletin board system, and the other is the Pinelands Remote Bulletin Board System. Access to both systems is free, and you can pick up a load of information, including broadcast schedules and an English broadcast database. You can also send and receive electronic messages and plug into news bulletins and conferences on shortwave. On the radio dial are programs about shortwave. In the United States, a program called World of Radio is broadcast by several stations, among them WWCR in Nashville and WRNO in New Orleans. The times and frequencies of the broadcasts are varied, but you might want to check them out and get a broadcast schedule once you start listening to shortwave in earnest. Just think of it. As you sit there listening to this tape and flipping through the pages of the book, thousands of signals are zipping by you at the speed of light. Voices and sounds from all over the world, just waiting for you to listen. All you need is a shortwave receiver and some electricity to power it, and you're off on a wonderful adventure in the magical world of shortwave broadcasting. Happy listening.
Oh yeah, there we go. From 1991 in the Radio Shack book, listening to Shortwave with the included tape. Hope everyone enjoyed it. Hope you got to hear it and YouTube didn't take it down. And I hope you all have a good day. And we'll talk to you later. Take care, everyone.